Today we bring you another of our great geopolitical summaries, and this time it's about a country many of you have been waiting for. Today on Fish Memoirs, we're diving into the land of liberty and the home of Uncle Sam, the United States of America. Of course, talking about US geopolitics means talking about the geopolitics of the entire planet. Without a doubt, we're dealing with the most influential country in the world, so we need to keep our eyes wide open not to miss a thing in this video. First things first. The United States of America is a federal republic made up of 50 states and one federal district. In addition to these states and Washington, D.C., the U.S. also includes a long list of associated island territories that are part of the country in one way or another. Puerto Rico is one of them, but there are many more. The nation stretches across North America, bordered by Canada to the north, Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico to the south, and by the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans to the east and west respectively. It's enormous, and in fact it's the third largest country in the world after Russia and Canada, with around 9.8 million square kilometers. It's also the third most populated nation on Earth, after China and India, with an estimated 333 million people. About 14% of them are immigrants, since the history of the United States has been shaped by migration from its very beginnings. The Hispanic or Latino population is one of the fastest growing ethnic groups, making up roughly 18.7% of the total population. When it comes to international relations, the United States is without question one of the main global players. It's a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, which gives it veto power and enormous influence over the global order. It's also a founding member and the central pillar of NATO, while maintaining a vast network of bilateral military alliances with countries such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines, among many others. The US is one of the three members of the AUKUS alliance, which brings together the major powers of the Anglosphere: the United Kingdom, the United States, and Australia. It's also part of ANZUS, a Pacific Security Pact that includes Australia and New Zealand. On the economic front, the United States plays a key role in both the G7 and G20, where it often sets the tone for global economic policy. Economically, one of its most important partnerships is the trilateral agreement with Canada and Mexico, the USMCA, which guarantees free trade between the three major economies of North America. The U.S. is also part of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, or APEC, and the QUAD Alliance, which seeks to strengthen cooperation and development in the Indo-Pacific region. This last alliance, formed by the United States, India, Australia, and Japan, is designed to counterbalance China's growing influence in the area. For all these reasons, the United States stands as the leader of what is known as the Western Bloc, a political and economic alliance built on the principles of free market capitalism and liberal democracy. One of its most important bilateral relationships is with another key member of that bloc, the United Kingdom. The US also maintains an exceptionally close relationship with Canada, defined by a shared border stretching more than 5,500 miles, the longest undefended border in the world. The two countries are deeply interconnected through economic, cultural, and defense ties. Economically, they are vital trading partners for each other. They also share commitments on environmental protection, water management, and coordinated responses to global challenges, such as climate change and natural disasters. But then there's Mexico, and things get a bit more complicated here. While the United States and Mexico depend heavily on each other, they face persistent challenges related to security and migration. Their shared border has become the epicenter of these concerns, marked by ongoing debates over illegal immigration and drug trafficking. Despite these tensions, both nations continue to cooperate closely on security initiatives and joint efforts to fight organized crime and narco-trafficking. Culturally and socially, the connections between their populations run deep, enriching both societies. As you can see, in Europe, the United States' main allies are its NATO partners, with particularly strong ties to Germany and France. In Asia, Japan, the Philippines, and South Korea form the backbone of America's Pacific presence, essential to balancing China's influence and managing the threat posed by North Korea. In the Middle East, Israel and Saudi Arabia are key allies, although Washington's relationship with Riyadh can be complicated by human rights concerns and Saudi Arabia's recent outreach to powers like China and Russia. And in North Africa, Morocco stands out as the United States' most important ally in the region. And what about America's enemies? In this case, the United States has three main rivals. The first is Russia. Relations between the US and Russia have been historically tense since the Cold War era and the days of the Soviet Union. Although there was a brief period of improvement after the USSR collapsed, tensions have flared again in recent years due to NATO's eastward expansion and regional conflicts, such as those in Syria and Ukraine. Still, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, Russia has become a smaller player compared to the US too. Today, America's true rival is the rising superpower, China. This competition is largely driven by Beijing's growing political influence in the Indo-Pacific and its economic challenge to US dominance, as China gradually narrows the gap with Uncle Sam. 3. And finally, there's its long-standing nemesis, Iran, the nightmare of both the United States and its ally Israel in the Middle East, as many of you already know if you follow the channel. 4. Beyond these three, other nations such as Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, and various proxies aligned with Iran, Russia, or China also oppose the United States on the global stage. One particularly interesting thing about the United States is that, despite being such a vast and powerful country, it has no major active territorial disputes with other nations. That's one of the advantages of becoming a global power after the colonial era had already passed. Perhaps the most significant territorial issues it faces today stem from disputes involving indigenous lands within its own borders, and from a handful of small Pacific islands once claimed during the Guano era. When it comes to international conflicts, though, the United States hits the jackpot. Even if it's not currently engaged in a traditional war, the US is indirectly involved in a wide range of military operations around the world. Over the past century, Washington has mastered the art of destabilizing or toppling governments with communist leanings or ideologies opposed to its own. To achieve this, it has often relied on funding and supporting opposition militias or rebel groups, many of which have eventually turned into bigger problems than the ones they were meant to solve. Ironically, several of these groups ended up becoming part of what the United States now considers one of its greatest enemies of the 21st century. Terrorism, from operations against ISIS in Syria and Iraq to its long presence in Afghanistan until 2021 and ongoing counterterrorism missions in the Horn of Africa and the Sahel, the United States has been, and continues to be, playing its own global game of risk. We also can't forget the continuous military presence in South Korea, or the so-called freedom of navigation operations carried out by Uncle Sam across the Indo-Pacific to challenge China's maritime claims. Beyond direct interventions, Washington's immense military, economic, and technological power has become a lifeline for its allies in wartime. This has been made especially clear through the advanced weapons and defense systems supplied to Ukraine. And then there's Israel, the single largest recipient of US military aid, receiving around $3 billion a year. To sustain all this, the United States maintains over 700 military bases spread across 80 different countries worldwide. In fact, more than 1/3 of all nations on Earth host at least one US military base. Of course, all this power didn't come for free. Being the world's leading military force and the largest economy on Earth, with a nominal GDP of roughly $21 trillion, comes with a major advantage. The US dollar is the world's reference currency for international trade. What does that mean? It means the demand for dollars is far greater than for any other currency. This gives the United States, or more precisely its central bank, the Federal Reserve, a unique privilege. It can print large amounts of money without triggering runaway inflation or sharply devaluing its currency against others. In other words, the US can create more money out of thin air than any other country without facing immediate consequences, though of course, even that kind of power has its limits. To give you an idea of just how powerful the United States is, if California were its own country, it would rank as the world's 5th largest economy, with Silicon Valley serving as the beating heart of global technology. Los Angeles, meanwhile, leads in entertainment and advanced manufacturing. But it's not all about tech. The sheer abundance of natural resources across the US is staggering. In the western region, particularly in the Rocky Mountains, mining and mineral extraction are essential pillars of the local economy. Moving south, agriculture takes center stage, especially cotton and tobacco, along with the energy industry driven by the famous oil and natural gas reserves of Texas and the Gulf of Mexico. This southern economy was traditionally less developed, with lower investment in infrastructure and education, though that has been changing in recent years thanks to the technological boom in states like Texas and Florida. The northern region has long been the country's industrial powerhouse, the birthplace of America's heavy industry revolution. However, in recent decades, parts of the north, known as the Rust Belt, have suffered economic decline due to the collapse of traditional manufacturing. Still, cities like Chicago and Boston have successfully reinvented themselves as global financial and technological hubs. As for the East, it has historically been the most developed part of the country, the cradle of America's expansion. The Northeast in particular stands as a global financial and service center, led by New York City, home to Wall Street, the most influential financial district in the world, and of course we can't forget Alaska, a state incredibly rich in oil, gas, and mineral resources. All these resources and the country's dominant political position make the United States one of the most important players in global trade. However, despite being a superpower, things aren't as perfect as they may seem. The US faces major internal challenges. To begin with, its healthcare system leaves much to be desired for such a wealthy and developed nation. To put it in perspective, America's life expectancy is closer to that of Turkey, Algeria, or Malaysia than to that of Canada. Economic inequality is another deep wound in American society, hitting working-class communities the hardest. Like Spain, the US is also dealing with an aging population, which poses serious long-term challenges to the sustainability of its economy and welfare system. Added to this is an enormous public debt, which has reached record highs and threatens to become a major obstacle for fiscal stability in the years ahead. Migration is another pressing issue, and one closely tied to racism and the country's internal contradictions. The United States presents itself as an open and inclusive nation, yet it's also where tragedies like the murder of George Floyd take place. While other Western democracies often look on in disbelief at America's gun policies and police violence, the US has also been the birthplace of powerful social movements such as Black Lives Matter and Me Too. These movements haven't only reshaped American politics and society, they've also inspired and influenced activism across the developed world. Politically, the United States is a federal republic and a constitutional democracy that blends federalism with a strong separation of powers among the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The president serves as both head of state and head of government, while Congress, made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives, and the Supreme Court form the other two pillars of governance. The US has a two-party system dominated by the Democrats, generally seen as the more progressive party, and the Republicans, the more conservative one. Elections are held frequently. Presidential elections every 4 years, midterms halfway through each term, and countless state and local contests. Civic participation is high, reflecting the country's deeply rooted democratic culture. In summary, the United States remains today the main leader of the Western Bloc, a coalition that has long championed democracy and economic freedom. However, Washington has also faced heavy criticism for its pattern of political and military interventionism, particularly in the Middle East and Africa. The truth is that Uncle Sam knows its global dominance is slipping, and that we're moving toward a world where China could take the lead. That's why the relationships the US builds with China's rivals, especially India, are becoming increasingly important. All this is taking place in the midst of a broader shift, especially visible during the Trump era, toward greater isolationism and a reduced international presence. That's all for today's video. You know the drill. If you enjoyed the story, give it a like, hit subscribe, and dive in for the next one.